Welcome to the webinar. First of all, to manage a little bit of your expectations, the aim of this is really to enable you to share what your practices are now, how are you experiencing it. Maybe there is something that you've tried and it works very well and other entities can try it. Maybe it's something you've tried that doesn't work, and let us share that knowledge as well so that we can work on it together. There will be a short input from my side, a small presentation. And then we will go into a more open Q&A sharing practices round, and we will be a bit flexible about how we do it. But first, let us figure out who is here. And it would be cool if you could write in the chat and say, hey, which NC do you come from? What is your role and what brings you here? Maybe you're a project manager or something, or a part of the NC board. And maybe the best binge TV recommendation you did over the COVID times. We had quite a few registrations, so the crowd should be quite international. I see that there are some project managers from ISs. There are quite a few people from different NCs from different corners of Europe. That's a great recommendation, Schwarzkopf online events. I support that. Nice. There are some people from Ireland that are organizing a great event with public outreach and innovation. Cool. Perfect. So welcome you all. I hope you can learn something from this. We are all here with this idea that we want to help. This first part of the webinar will be recorded, but then when we go into Q&A, I will stop the recording, so that will be private information that will only be shared across the people that are present here. So I hope we can treat this as more or less a safe space. So let us get started. I think these are the things that you said you expect from this webinar. I made a little word cloud, and we see that there are a lot of course, a lot of people are expecting to learn something new about fundraising, something new about strategies that work. Can we do events online? Is it a smart choice, or are we now risking by moving our events online, having a harder time fundraising in future? What is the potential that we have of this crisis, and how do we use it? So all of those are big open questions, and the attempt now is to really focus on, in this tricky situation, what can we do? What can we do to make it easier for us to fundraise in future? What can we do to just make sure that we stay alive, right? We can't really predict it, what will happen in future, but maybe we can plan and you know, be a little bit, not to be set to a failure. So recommendation number one is to identify what is it exactly that your NC needs. I have been working in the office for 2 years now, and I constantly see that whenever I have talks with NCs, it's quite a frequent situation that NCs don't have an NC budget. It's normal practice to have a budget for an event, but trust me, it is more needed for an NC as organization to be able to plan liquidity, income, see where there are some gaps, and see potential for maybe broader fundraising. In this concrete situation, it's even more critical. It's really important that there is a place where you have an overview of the payments that you cannot avoid. For example, if you're renting an office space and you already have a signed contract, or if you need to get this tax audit every year and it's a set fee that you pay. So it's important that you have an overview of those fees, but also take a look at all of the projects that you've planned. Maybe there are some contracts that you signed with the hostels, and you already know that there is some money that you have to pay. And just gather all of this information in one place so that you're able to see how much money you're actually missing. And big advice number two is really try to put those potential scenario budgets. So how does this budget of yours look if indeed in the second half of the year you can have a national session and you would have some income, for example, from membership fees? Or how would it look if there will be a second wave of sickness and schools will not be able to open and therefore there will be no events until the end of the year? What would be your expenses then, and what could be your potential sources of income? So it's important to plan for both of those scenarios because we really cannot predict which one of them would be happening. What can you do after you've identified how much money you actually need to fundraise? First of all, biggest advice is to focus on the contacts with whom you already had some agreements for this year. Most probably, it is that those agreements were about projects that were about to take place and now they're postponed. Maybe you could find an agreement where you could offer to them to do some activities online, or maybe something that you could do already, or maybe they could transfer you a part of the money that they promised already now. I think it's the easiest way to get some basic liquidity on your accounts while you're already working with someone who has some context, who already agreed to support you. It's also possible that maybe the partner still is very excited about that concrete event, but maybe you could pitch to them something new that would be on top of it, or maybe that would be sort of like a build-up to the event. So for example, if you have a thematic partner for your national session, you could offer to them a short online discussion that would be 1-2 hours that will be quite easy to organize, but still would allow you to get some financial safety out of it. So advice number 3, after you've exhausted the database or the people with whom you've already had some relationships planned for this year, you can also then try to approach contacts that already know you from previous events, or maybe you've had people from those organizations as guest speakers in your events. Maybe you have some personal connection. It is going to be more difficult to have to find new partnerships. Therefore, it is advisable to focus on the organizations or people with whom you've already had some contact. And what is advisable from just general fundraising practice is, I think all of the organizations are struggling in some way. So sometimes it's just helpful to give them a call and ask, how are they doing with this crisis? How are they managing? Is it difficult for them? What did they have to cancel? And as you're having this conversation that really doesn't put you in a place where you're asking for money, you're getting a lot of useful information that can then frame your request very well. So I think I've mentioned already that for a lot of organizations, they have also planned some costs that they'll not incur now. For example, all of the travel, all of the events in person, some maybe personal development budgets that they had. And now those are free money that in some cases they would be willing to reallocate to potential new projects. So that, for instance, could be a key way for you to tap into that, to understand what they have planned, what they have canceled. Are they looking for something new? Are there some things that are happening for them where your organization, EYP, could help them reach those goals and potential? And then finally, when it comes to the audiences and potential partners with whom you haven't had any relationship before, maybe you wrote to them a lot of cold emails, but it never went through. Maybe you applied for the grants a few times, but you've always been rejected. Now is a good time to start building those relationships, because it is generally a lot easier to collaborate on events online. It requires less resources from both organizations, and it's sometimes as easy as, we want to gather for an online speech. This is a proposed speaker. We will share this call with our network, and we guarantee that 90 people will come. But building this ground would then allow you to enter this more personal relationship. And then you would come to a point where you would be able to see some cool potential project together, you already would have this background to rely on. And they would have this cool experience of getting to know your members, what you're about, the values that you have. And it's going to be easier to maybe get a yes at the next grant application round, or get a yes whenever you would be asking for some in-kind or cash donation. And the final point, it's about planning for the future. Lars, do you want to make a comment about it?
Sure. So as you all know, these times might not be the most efficient times when it comes to fundraising. However, the economic situation after this whole pandemic will be a big no-go zone for fundraising as well. So we will have to be able to plan and see how we will be tackling the upcoming recession in a way that we find the resources and also the right angles to approach fundraising so to be successful. So basically this means whatever planning you had made in advance about how to approach certain events fundraising wise, the timelines you made, you might want to revise them and see how you can approach fundraising during this time of a pandemic. As Val already explained, most of that will be about online events, of course. Then how will you approach fundraising during the rebuilding period, where companies and foundations are trying to get back to business as usual, of course. And then how will you go into that final stage of where everything is still being built up again, but we're kind of in a situation that we used to be in before. So that's really a timeline you should think of as well. So do create that plan for the future together with your NC, or maybe jointly do it with other sessions, or we can even do that with the entire network. We can see about that.
Yeah. And just to remind you, there are some opportunities for support from the EO if you're organizing online events. I think the deadline is coming very soon. So if you're planning to organize something and you really know that there is a couple of €1,000 that you need to have this year to cover some expenses and they're missing, then this could also be one of the options that you have at your hand. So just to quickly recap, this is a suggested way forward. It's not the best. It's just some thoughts that I thought could be helpful if you feel completely lost in this process and you're disoriented and you don't know what your next steps should be. So to remind you, let's first identify which costs you have to have and what is your completely minimal budget that you need to fundraise. And then maybe in some other scenarios, how would you invest a bit more money? But it's important to have this number in your head as soon as possible and to understand how much money you're missing now. Once you've done that, talk to the people that you've already have some relationship with contractually, or you plan to do something together in 2020 and see if they're flexible, if they maybe can give you a little bit more. Maybe you can find out some other ways to cooperate. Talk to the people that you didn't have plans, but maybe there's something you could do because they know of how cool and great you are from before. And then as the last step, think of all of those potential founders that there are and use this time now as an opportunity to build stronger partnerships in future. And on that note, think of what is coming forward, how it's difficult to plan, how can you put and plan your fundraising in the timeline given the whole economic situation now, and maybe try to think of how companies would be thinking in future.